win. I will already, no, I appreciate that.
Yeah, and so, I mean, again, it's not something, I have just found that people have found it really helpful
Yeah.
because they couldn't
People
conceive
exactly.
it, because
Yeah.
they're just
I
taking
cannot,
advantage of
like,
life.
I'm, oh,
It,
this is, oh, yeah.
particularly since there's so much definition changes
Yeah, okay.
and it's hard to believe, like, how do you not believe it? How do you talk about Jesus but not know the gospel, and so you hear it.
Yeah, yeah.
And you also hear why it's confusing.
Right.
So part of it
Because
too
there's,
is going home afterwards and talking, back to and then talking about what we heard, because people will say, oh, well, but they said this. And then I can say, well, this is what they meant, right? And so that's the other thing. If you've only, if you talk to me and then you talk to a Christian Scientist, you may not be realizing what's going on.
yeah,
Right?
yeah.
And so this kind of gives you an opportunity to hear.
Yeah.
Now you can also just listen to some testimonies. But again, this is something we can experience together, and then I can give a
Right,
explanation,
yeah, yeah.
And it is, I mean, I just will say there's something different about being in a room of people and hearing the nods and and then you're just like, wow, they're all like resonating with us,
Yeah.
this is crazy. So again, it's just there's kind of an experience.
Hi there.
Yeah.
Oh,
No,
I
hear what you're
forgot
saying.
again.
I know. Hey.
Whenever I bring it, you don't come. Whenever you come, I don't bring it.
Oh no.
Why?
You know, I said something about cigarettes.
You said something about cigarettes? About what? About Samuel? I don't think so.
Hi, how you doing?
No.
Good.
I don't know. I think you have me into the wrong one. How are you? Good.
Wow, that's confusing.
We were watching a movie, and the movie got out, and it was like 5:40, and I was like, gotta go.
It's not close.
6:40.
Oh, what did you see?
Free Beer Friday.
Oh, yeah, I went to see that.
Wasn't cute.
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't think it was as good as the original, but it was good.
Yeah.
Because I went back and watched Freaky Friday first.
Definitely the best.
Yeah.
But I love it when they're all the same actors.
Yes.
Oh, did they really?
Yes.
Oh, that's funny.
That was really something. Yeah. Yeah.
That's much better.
Even the Chinese ladies.
What is the message?
I hope it's gonna allow me to. I think it's just giving, telling us how nice it's gonna be today and Samuel.
Okay, you want to read it, make sure
Yeah, I
it's,
think the experience is gonna.
I don't think that was
does it
me.
look okay?
Really? Maybe just take the credit.
Okay.
Okay, so we're ready to.
Okay. Okay. Reading 1 Samuel 1 for our new study. There was a certain man of Ramatham Zophim of the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, son of Elihu, son of Tohu, son of Zuph, an Ephrathite. He had 2 wives. The name of the one was Hannah, and the name of the other Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Now this man used to go up year by year from his city to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts at Shiloh, where the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests of the Lord. On the day when Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah his wife and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her, though the Lord had closed her womb. And her rival used to provoke her grievously to irritate her, because the Lord had closed her womb. So it went on year by year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she used to provoke her. Therefore Hannah wept and could not eat. And Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? And why do you not eat? And why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons? After they had eaten and drunk in Shiloh, Hannah rose. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. She was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. And she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant and remember me and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head. As she continued praying before the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was speaking in her heart, only her lips moved, and her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli took her to be a drunken woman. And Eli said to her, How long will you go on being drunk? Put your wine away from you. But Hannah answered, No, my lord, I am a woman troubled in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for all along I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation. Then Eli answered, Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition that you have made to him. And she said, Let your servant find favor in your eyes. Then the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. They rose early in the morning and worshipped before the Lord. Then they went back to their house at Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. And in due time Hannah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Samuel, for she said, I have asked for him from the Lord. The man Elkanah and all his house went up to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice and to pay his vow. But Hannah did not go up, for she said to her husband, As soon as the child is weaned, I will bring him, so that he may appear in the presence of the Lord and dwell there forever. Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Do what seems best to you. Wait until you have weaned him. Only may the Lord establish his word. So the woman remained and nursed her son until she weaned him. And when she had weaned him, she took him up with her along with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine, and she brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. And the child was young. Then they slaughtered the bull, and they brought the child to Eli. And she said, O my Lord, as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who is standing here in your presence praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition that I made to him. Therefore I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is lent to the Lord. And he worshiped the Lord there. Lord, thank you for this word and for this group that you brought together to study it tonight. I pray that you would speak through Mike and open our eyes and ears and our hearts to receive all that you have for us tonight. We pray these things in Jesus' holy name. Amen.
Thank you, Karen. And welcome to everyone. Welcome to Hannah and Marie, granddaughter and grandmother. Thank you for coming. I don't promise to have the last word on Hannah of the Bible. Many others, thousands of others have weighed in on Hannah, but I hope that this is a valuable study for you. We're at one of the hinge points in the history of Israel, in the story of Hannah. And what we're going to do tonight, which we don't always do, we're going to really just go through verse by verse, just a real close reading, and I'll draw out some of the points. There is a new feature. Yes, not just that we're beginning a new series, but if you turn to page 8 through 10, let me give you a clue. I received assistance on this part, but it wasn't human assistance. Yes, there is a chart there. Now, I assure you that your Bible teacher is not being replaced with a robotic voice speaking to you, okay? But this, I simply asked AI to give me a thematic overview of the chapter. And look at 8, page 8 here. It just, boom, like that, in a minute. It generated that. And then on pages 9 and 10, it delved into the earlier commentators, ancient, medieval, modern, very recent, and then typological interpretations. So yes, AI actually can give theological ideas too. So I leave it to I'm very interested in your feedback, whether you think this is helpful, because I can easily include this with the weekly lesson that I'm writing, because I think it has some teaching value, but I'm interested in what you think about it as well. It would take a long time to identify all these individual voices from the past or just to organize them in that particular way. How does it do this? Well, if you just look on the web alone, there are so many tens of thousands of sermons that have been given, and so AI will it's machine learning, and so it will go and will take these and find the overall themes and ideas and synthesize it. But it is pretty remarkable what it's able to do, but not as a substitute for our own reflection on the Word. So, and no, you're not allowed during our sharing time to pull out your phone and ask AI what you should say, okay? Maybe that sounds like do as I say, but not as I do. So to understand just a little bit about the context here, if you remember the biblical book of Judges, what is the general situation of the Israelites in the days of the Judges? Not good.
Everyone did what was right in his own sight.
Judges 17:7 is actually repeated one more time, but everyone did that which was right in his own eyes. And this is an era in which many people either don't make promises at all or they don't keep the promises that they make. This is why Hannah is so exceptional all through this chapter. There's such an emphasis upon Hannah that she makes a vow and then she scrupulously fulfills what she has promised to the Lord. And actually, and guess what? Elkanah, who legally in this day, the husband had to validate his wife's vow. There's even a passage in the book of Numbers about that. He had to validate her vow for it to be legally binding, but Elkanah completely backs this up. He takes very seriously the vow that Hannah takes. Peninnah is another story. So, but Hannah and Elkanah seem to be really together in this respect. But there are other texts of Scripture that also speak of kind of the social breakdown. I think of Micah. Again, this isn't, period of the Judges isn't the only time of social decay, but it says, do not trust a neighbor, do not have confidence in a friend. And think about this phrase, from her who lies in your bosom, guard your lips. So don't share the truth with the one who's lying right next to you at night. In the book of Proverbs, it says, many a man proclaims his own loyalty, but who can find a trustworthy man? And so this is the context. And yet, even in the society marked by moral and spiritual corruption, God had his remnant of faithful Israelites in this period. This included certainly Hannah and Elkanah. And the Lord also is at work in raising up, beginning a new tradition of the prophets in Israel. There's actually an unnamed prophet we'll talk about next week who appears kind of out of nowhere in chapter 2 to bring a prophecy of judgment against the high priest Eli. Never identified, but nonetheless, Samuel represents the beginning of something new. And Jennifer talked last week about how the judges seem to be localized. They seem to be kind of engaged with maybe one tribe or one part of Israel. It says explicitly about Samuel that he was recognized through all the tribes. So that kind of idea of a prophet to all of the Israelites, that's something that seems to be emerging with Samuel. And so he is often thought of as the first of the prophets. But who are the later prophets? Elijah, Elisha, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, this whole succession. And where does it all begin? As in my text I sent to you, I say, not with the courage of a David or with the wisdom or wealth of a Solomon. It begins with the anguished cry of a woman who seems to be powerless in her own personal circumstance. Isn't it remarkable how the Lord begins with something so seemingly humble as a childless woman who simply pours out her heart with no concept of the the long-range implication of her prayer to have a child. She doesn't know if it's going to be a boy or girl, doesn't know what kind of boy it's going to be, has no concept at the time that she prays the prayer that her son is going to be, that she has vowed to the Lord, is going to be the human instrument to begin a work. Without Samuel, we don't really have Saul, we don't have David, we don't have the beginning of the whole prophetic tradition, but the start of that is this woman, Hannah. It's quite remarkable. And there's a parallel in the New Testament with a woman named Mary. Next week we'll talk about Hannah's song and the parallel of that to Mary's song. So let's begin unfolding this step by step, and I'm on first page of the handout here. So kudos to Karen for getting the names correct here. Sort of. There was a certain man. That's a phrase that comes up elsewhere in the Old Testament historical books, and it's often connected with the Lord doing something new, the Lord beginning something. Elkanah is simply said to be an Ephraimite, and I don't have the reference here, but in Chronicles, he is actually identified as a Levite. And that's significant because that means that Samuel is of priestly descent. So the prophetic ministry comes out of this priestly background. We have two wives. Those of you who are part of our study of Genesis, well, if we simply are a biblical reader, we are probably aware that the polygamous household was not known for being a place of peace and harmony, to put it lightly. Whether it's Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar, or Jacob, Rachel, and Leah, those are maybe the two most famous cases, but there's strife and particularly rivalry between the wives focused, and it often took the form of competition to have children. Unfortunately, there was a tendency in this culture for women simply to be valued for their fertility as, baby makers. And so the plight of a barren woman, an infertile woman, was particularly dire in this particular time because she lost status in the eyes of everyone else in the household. And to make things even worse in this situation, the rival wife who has children, even if they both had children, there may have been rivalry, but in this case, Hannah has no children, Peninnah does, and Peninnah is just constantly aggravating and provoking Hannah with the awareness of her own infertility. And it's clearly described in this text as something that goes on and on year after year. And it is kind of interesting that the focal point is on this feast. It's as if, you know how family gatherings often are places where family conflicts often break out? Like it's over the Thanksgiving or Christmas holiday. The people who aren't forced into close proximity, it's like the two uncles that are sitting next to one another at the Thanksgiving table, and they start fighting about who knows what, some personality conflict or politics or what have you. So that's kind of what seems to be happening here. Maybe there was some low-level conflict, but when they're kind of pressed together, they're on this trip together, the two wives were in closer contact. And do we have any hint as to what's going on with Peninnah? Do you notice anything in the text here to help explain why she's so adamant in provoking Hannah? Other than the fact that she's a rival wife, yeah.
Oh, because he loved her.
Right.
The husband loved her.
So it may have been a situation like that, could have been an arrangement, but it says he loved her and he gave her a double portion. So that's a very tangible sign of his special preference and love. Were you going to say something else?
It just kind of reminds me of the coat of many colors, that
The
Jacob
coat of many
gets,
colors, yes.
just kind of.
So Peninnah, even though she has children, has provided children to the household, to Elkanah, she apparently is very aware that that Elkanah, I don't know, maybe there was a special spring in his step or smile on his face when he would see Hannah. and that provokes her. So, to be fair, Penina doesn't come across very well in this chapter, I guess, overall, but we should remember that if Hannah had bitterness in her heart about her barrenness or lack of a child, then Penina may have had her own bitterness of heart, just at being rank second and always falling behind Hannah in terms of the competition for Elkanah's affection, which is a very good argument against polygamy, right? There are references to the festival that would have been held where the tabernacle was in Shiloh, and there's something about it happening yearly. This comes up in the phrasing a number of different times. Verse 3 speaks of going, I don't know how your translation reads, go up from his city yearly. And of course, that's a little odd because there were 3 times every year, according to what's clearly stated in Exodus 23:27. It says 3 times a year, all your males shall appear before the Lord. Technically, it seems to have applied to the adult Israelite males. But notice that Elkanah is bringing his whole household. He considers it important enough for the entire household, with his wives, with all of his children, maybe household servants, to all go. You realize what an undertaking this would have been in terms of like literally pulling up stakes and moving like the tent and all the arrangements and the pack animals and for a multi-day trip. So Elkanah clearly is someone who takes seriously the requirements of the law, even in this time when frankly, when he gets to Shiloh and he encounters the priests and his sons there, they are rather heedless but disregarding the requirements of the law. So that wasn't true of Elkanah. So it's possible that during this time they were just meeting. There was a festival meeting maybe happening just once per year. At least it's not clear whether the point is that the situation was developing year after year or whether they were just going up once a year. It's a little bit ambiguous. Sacrifice is mentioned. In verse 25 of the chapter, the sacrifice is that of a bull. This was a very lavish offering. A bull could be generally the kind of sacrifice that's noted in Leviticus, but only for someone of means would be able to afford that kind of offering. So the Israelite worshipers were allowed to eat some of what they took. Verse 5, Hannah gets the double portion, but we find out later that the Hophni and Phinehas are not even following the law in terms of they're just sort of grabbing whatever they want even before it's been properly offered to the Lord as a sacrifice. So Penina is a rival to Hannah. She is provoking her bitterly to irritate her, verse 6, because the Lord had closed Hannah's womb. Elkanah, as I read him, seems to be a good-hearted man. He might not have had the power to stop the negative interactions happening between his 2 wives. It's possible that he wasn't fully aware of what was happening.
Sorry.
How about when he says, "Am I not better to you than 10 sons?"
Sorry.
Do you think he really understood the depth of Hannah's brokenheartedness? I don't think so. Now, was he just a clueless guy who's detached? That might be a little bit unfair to him. He certainly responds positively to Hannah's prayer to the Lord and her vow that she makes, but he's not really tuned in. When he says, am I not better to you than 10 sons? There's no response from Hannah. So either maybe she had already told him what was going on with Penina. Maybe she had told him, what's that? Maybe she's crying, or maybe she just held it in because maybe she didn't want to put him in a difficult situation by talking about the internal dynamics, because here, what's he going to do? Is he going to reject the wife who's given him children in favor of the wife who hasn't given him children? I mean, this is a dilemma of a polygamous household. How do you keep everyone happy, particularly when the 2 wives are simply not getting along? It's kind of a no-win situation. And even if he had sided with Hannah over against Peninnah, then that might not have really resolved it.
Yeah, this just seems like power dynamics. And yeah, it's impossible. And he's in that relationship with two women. So there
Yes.
is, I mean, that just,
There's no
he's
divorce,
made that
there's no,
decision.
he
So I
can't
don't-
buy an apartment across town for Peninnah and put her there, or Hannah for that matter. Like, no, they're for, for better and for worse, they're kind of stuck in the same situation. And this is kind of a replay of Genesis 30, and that's where it's the great conception competition, as I call it, where Leah seems to be winning because she's bringing more children along, and she keeps having children. It's it's really sad because she says, now my husband will love me because I've given him yet another son. But it doesn't work that way, because his heart, Jacob, I think it was love at first sight for Jacob, because what does he do? He sees Rachel, and he goes and he moves the stone away. He does this macho thing to impress her. He's clearly taken with her, like he's infatuated from the time he sees her. And so he can't just turn on that kind of affection for Leah. And the same thing may be true here. Yeah.
Question coming from this corner is, were there any laws with regard to how many wives you could have, with the exception of the king, that could only have one wife?
I don't think so. Wait, I don't think there is, I can't think of any law that limits that. It's interesting, much later, like more than, like 1,500 years later, Islam comes along, and Islam, the Quran says that a husband can have up to 4 wives. But then the text, if you look closely at various passages in the Quran, it says he must treat all of them equally. And there's another text in the Quran that says that one will never be able to treat them all equally. If you put all the texts together, it's not a ringing endorsement of polygamy. So the Sultan with the harem of, 50 women, that's totally non-Quranic, right? So even from ancient times, it was recognized that this is a problem of treating all equal. I suppose if you're just extraordinarily wealthy, you just have your servants go out, and if one wife receives a special benefit, then your servants will go out and give it to the other wives as well. But short of that, someone with kind of limitless resources, it's very, very difficult to see that there's even-handedness across the whole spectrum.
I have a question. Let me know if this is off topic, but in terms of polygamy, lots of people come against like Christianity, and they'll say, well, the Bible is full of polygamy. The founding fathers of the faith had polygamy. And we as Christians would condemn fundamental Mormons for their practice of polygamy. So how do you explain like founding fathers of the faith having a bunch of wives? I know it's like Middle Eastern culture that still happens today, but I've just always wondered that, because I would be so sad if I was in a polygamous situation, but
Right.
that's all throughout the Bible,
Yeah. It's not even good for the so-called favored wife either, because the favored wife, in this case Hannah, has others who are rivals to her or provoking her. So you think, if you're the favored wife, then you walk with a spring in your step. Not necessarily. Well, we have the creation account. In the creation, it's Adam and Eve, one and one. And so I think the general interpretation is that polygamy was, for a period of time, was allowed, but it was never the pattern. Jesus said from the beginning, it's not been it was not this way. He was talking about divorce when Jesus said that, but we could say polygamy was not from the beginning as it was. And then the leaders of the New Testament, in the New Testament, like the bishop or overseer, was supposed to be a man of one woman or husband of one wife. And so this is becoming a very live issue in Kenya and other places in Africa that had a polygamous culture, where high-ranking males of wealth and were thought, it was seen as a positive thing to have multiple wives. And what often happened in the missionary situations, whether Africa or elsewhere, is it was thought not appropriate when the gospel first goes forth to tell a leading male, like a king, that he had to put away all of the wives but one, because that would force the other wives into poverty or even prostitution. There'd be no way for them. they would have no social role at all if they were put aside. So the idea was that the rising generation would be encouraged to go back to the Genesis pattern of monogamy. Was that what you were going to say, Jennifer?
No, I just would reiterate that, like, if you study all those polygamous relationships, and Mike has said this in the Old Testament, there is not one family that was not dysfunctional. So it's definitely not the ideal. But the other thing I wanted to mention about in Islam, how they have to treat all the wives alike. And where we were, they also put it down to, you also have to treat all the children alike. You know, you can't favor. And what we observed is that therefore the men generally neglect all the children equally. You just, because you can't take a chance that, you know, if you pay special attention to wife number one's child, you have to go search out a number two and a number three and a number four child. So I saw men who, you could tell they just love children because they would delight in other people's children but ignore their own because they couldn't afford to pay attention to, you know, one over any of the others. So.
Now, just for those who are just watching, I think you're speaking about Mali in the country
Yes,
of
Mali and West Africa elsewhere
Africa.
also. Yeah, yeah.
So Hannah's heart is really broken by these years of provocation and the fading hope that she will have a child. And ultimately what Hannah does, of course, in this chapter, is she takes her bitterness to the Lord to bring it before him. Pause. A question?
No, that's from Sue. The audio's off.
The audio's off on this.
Your words are saying one thing and the audio's saying something different.
I don't know how to correct the stream. I don't know how to, if you want to turn that off and on.
Slow?
She said, I don't know what happened just a couple minutes ago, but the live stream froze. And when it came back on, the timing for this audio speed is really off now.
It's probably just.
So that's when you're talking and the words are not syncing with your lips.
I'll put the microphone, I'll turn it off and on again, but that's the only thing I can think